The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the very 6th day of this 7-day session here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in February 2023. And I'd like to share with you several things. First of all, I'm going to start with something out of Thich Nhat Hanh's diaries when he first came to the United States. And that was quite a long time ago. This is dated the 26th of June, 1962. I brought just a few books with me, and I haven't had time to read any of them. How can I read when the forest is so calm, the lake so blue, the bird song so clear? Some mornings I stay in the woods all day, strolling leisurely beneath the trees and lying down on the soft carpet of moss, my arms folded, my eyes looking up to the sky. In those moments, I'm a different person. It would probably be accurate to say that I'm my true self. My perceptions, feelings, and thoughts aren't the same as when I'm in New York. Everything here appears brighter, I dare say, miraculous. We can experience life like that as miraculous, regardless of whether we're in a pleasant, easy place or whether we're in the midst of a challenging experience. But it takes a lot of work. And I'd like to share, in light of that, something of a book that I've already shared before. Let's see if I can get out of here. Back to this book, Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart. And this is Mark Epstein, who says, to one degree or another, we are all like Freud's friends who he was walking with in the forest, in a state of abbreviated or interrupted mourning. Acutely aware of our own transience, we alternate between an aching despondence and a rebellion against the facts. We cling to our loved ones or remove ourselves from them rather than loving them in all their vulnerability. In so doing, we distance ourselves from a grief that is an inevitable component of affection. Using our best obsessional defenses to keep this mourning at bay, we pay a price in how isolated and cut off we feel. From a Buddhist perspective, it is the very tendency to protect ourselves against mourning that is the cause of this greatest dissatisfaction. We've all grown up with experiences that were not fun necessarily. We've all lost people, things, places, and will continue to do so. This is the nature of life. But when we try to guard ourselves against losing, against feeling grief, against feeling whatever it is, whether it's rage, emptiness, sadness, we also fail to hear the bird song so clearly. We also fail to thrive in our environment in ways where we experience fully, richly, miraculously what we experience. There's a story about a man, very wealthy man, in a big fancy house. And there's a knock on the door, and he opens the door, and there is this absolutely beautiful young woman standing there. And she says, "Can I come in?" And he says, "Well, of course. What can I do for you? Would you like some tea, coffee? Have anything to eat? What do you need? Of course you can come in." And so she comes in and sits down, and immediately there's another knock on the door, and he goes, and there's this very ugly person standing there, and she kind of croaks, "Can I come in?" And he says, "Nope, nope, 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 no room at the inn here." And she says, "But I have to. My sister is here, and we go everywhere together. She is pleasure, and I am pain." And there's no way of escaping it, and yet we try so hard to escape pain, to escape disappointment, to escape fear, to escape embarrassment, to escape anxiety. And yet there's another way that Thich Nhat Hanh began to describe. And that is, if we walk in and allow ourselves to feel the energy of whatever that is that we're trying to hold at arm's length, it turns out to be not anywhere near as awful as it seems to be. The fear of experiencing it is far greater than the actual experience of it. And we cannot have one thing without the other. We cannot experience pleasure, joy, happiness, the exquisiteness of life without feeling the whole experience, which includes difficulty, pain, embarrassment, anxiety, grief, anger, and all the rest. So how do we get there? Because we're well practiced, well conditioned in holding the negative at bay, and at the same time wondering why our life feels empty, why we feel so needy, why we feel like we just have to have something. And yet we can reach for all kinds of somethings throughout our life, and people do. There are various different ways people do this. There's an interesting story, actually it's a true story, and there's a book perhaps in the library, I don't know whether it's in my library or upstairs, called Blowing Zen. In Japanese, that's Suizen. It is a particular Buddhist practice. There are monks that spend hours and hours and hours a day playing the shakuhachi flute, the bamboo flute, which involves very precise blowing. And they actually are known because they have baskets over their heads so that they are anonymous on purpose, because they're not advertising themselves. So this British man, who's extremely successful, he's quite young also, has a partner, has a flat in the best part of London, has an incredibly well-paying, high-level job, goes to party after party, has lots and lots of friends, and at one party, he finally tunes into his feeling of emptiness, just like there's got to be something more. This is so superficial. And in the next few days, he sees an advertisement in a British newspaper for a relaxing week in a Japanese Zen temple, which is what you're doing right now. And so he decides to go ahead and do it. And so he goes to Japan and it's sesshin, actually. But it sounds like it's a somewhat milder form of sesshin than what we do. I mean, there are some places that acquiesce to foreigners in particular. And this temple was no doubt trying to make ends meet by inviting foreigners to come and take part in a sort of a Zen training. But during the break times, he's out in the garden and he hears a shakuhachi being played. And there's a Japanese man playing shakuhachi, and he becomes entranced by this. And after the retreat, he goes and buys himself a shakuhachi and tries to learn how to play it. And somehow he is able to learn how to play it and encounters the man again. And the man turns out to be a shakuhachi master and agrees to take him on as a student. And so he apparently has some gift with this instrument and practices religiously and advances in his ability. And then one day he hears, because he's gone back to England, quit his job, and then now he's back in Japan again with his wife. And so he decides, he learns about Suizen, and he decides that he's going to go up in the mountains and spend 6 hours a day just practicing shakuhachi. And he chooses to do this for, I think it was 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks, he goes back and sees his shakuhachi teacher, who is quite impressed by his advancement. In essence, he was doing susokan with dedication for 6 hours a day, not thinking of anything else, being up there in the forest, alone, away from everyone, and blowing Zen. It changed his life. He had some rather interesting adventures as he continued to live in Japan and practice shakuhachi, including being invited by the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia, to play at some event. And he wasn't sure whether he would emerge alive or not, being who he was playing for, but apparently he was well rewarded. Last I heard, he was living in Vancouver teaching shakuhachi. But it's an example of the lives of so many of us. Here he has everything successful that society appreciates and says is an expression of success. And at a rather young age. He wasn't even 40, I don't believe. I think he might have been like 29 or something. And yet there was this empty hollowness in his life. We can try to fill it with all kinds of things, as he did. The parties, the fancy car, the big expensive apartment, and all the rest. Other people fill that emptiness with overwork, with addiction to any number of things, work being one of them, gambling, womanizing, or the opposite. I don't know, I've never heard the term manizing, but anyway, relationshipizing, and addiction to drugs or alcohol or any number of other things. There are plenty of ways we can attempt to avoid the inevitable. And I remember when I was in my very early 20s and living in Washington, D.C., we were in Burmese language training, about to head to Burma. And there was a neighbor who was only slightly older than I was. I think she was in her very early 30s, and she got diagnosed with breast cancer. Back then, this is the 1960s, it was pretty close to a death sentence, and she just couldn't handle it. And so every man that came around, she grabbed and went to bed with as an escape. it was a sad thing for all of us neighbors to witness. But she was trying desperately to hold death at bay, or hold her fear of death at bay, instead of walking right into it and living it. And of course, you all know the story of Jacques Lucéran, who, when he was dying, just went right into it and had a profound awakening experience. Or Ramana Maharshi, same thing, at the age of 14, went right into the experience. He didn't try to flee from it. He didn't try to distract himself with a lot of thoughts or a lot of reading or a lot of whatever else was available to him at age 14 in India. And he also had a profound awakening. These people that I'm naming here all went away, turned their back on what society says will make us happy, and followed their heart. And there's another story I've told in past day shows about a study I read. This is quite a long time ago. I think it was in the 70s. A study in which they were trying to determine whether there was a cancer personality. And like type A is prone to heart attacks. I don't know if that's still considered the case or not, but at one time it certainly was. And they were trying to find a type C, a cancer personality. And so they took a group of people for whom there was no remaining hope. All therapies had been used to no avail. And they featured two people in this study. The study took these people into interviews with psychiatrists. And the one was a young man in his early 30s, actually, who had 6 months to live. He also, like the British man, had a very successful life. Had grown up, gone into, it doesn't say what business he went into, but married the boss's daughter and was ready to inherit the business, and had the house in the gated community with the appropriate contingent of children and the trophy wife, and was deeply unhappy. He got cancer. When he went to the psychiatrist, he realized that if he had only 6 months to live, he may as well live it the way he really wanted to live. When he was a kid, he had wanted to do music, but his father wouldn't allow it, saying music is not for boys. And so he was never allowed to take any lessons in any instrument. So at 30, whatever it was, with 6 months left to live, he started taking violin lessons. At which point, his wife left him. He had quit his job also. That was part of it. And so suddenly he was free to follow his dream. And they followed up on the study, and 10 years later, he was alive still and playing in an orchestra in another state. And then there was the woman who had one interview with a psychiatrist and said, I'm not going back, because if I do, I will have to divorce my husband. And she died. Sometimes sickness can be an escape. It isn't necessarily always, but it can be. It's sort of a legitimate way to commit suicide for some people. But each of us comes into this life with a beingness that has certain karmic tendencies And we can honor those tendencies and move in directions that are fulfilling in life. Or we can do what our parents and society says we ought to do. Sometimes that works. Sometimes that is fulfilling. Sometimes it is the right thing to do. For my brother, it was the right thing to do. For me, I never was able to fulfill their dreams. And finally, I went my own way and found the square hole that fit the square peg. So each of us is tasked with tuning in to what will be fulfilling in our life. And in addition to that, it's not just about the physicality of it. It's also about tuning into our very beingness, to what's going on in our body that indicates whether we're feeling positive or negative, angry or sad, peaceful or joyful, or whatever else. And I started this talk by saying that there's loss everywhere. We are going to die. People around us have died. And it's going to continue eternally. But there are moments of profound presence and joy in life that we miss if we're caught in barricading ourselves against what might come and what someday will come. And that narrows down to even barricading ourselves against embarrassment or anxiety or a fear of being nobody. And yet, to be free of being caught in those mind states. And I dare say that when we're not caught in those mind states, often they simply don't come up, or they come up considerably more rarely. When we can be at one with life, it is incredibly rich, incredibly fulfilling. We are alive. We're like Thich Nhat Hanh walking in the forest, tuning into the trees, hearing the bird song so clearly, being at profound peace. We can do that as well. Zazen takes us there, but it takes us there through the tunnel of challenge, of meeting where we are caught and discovering the potential for freedom from that caughtness if we are willing to let down the defenses and dare to be nobody. Because that's the bottom line. And that actually is who we really are. Rinzai, the great Zen master Rinzai, said, "There's a true person of no rank coming in and out of the doors of your senses. If you haven't seen it now, see it now. See it now." The doors of our senses, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, that we can feel, touch, that we can think. Because thinking is also a sense. Who we really are is that true person of no rank, the one without a name, who experiences life through these senses and comes to the conclusion about certain events as a result. But if we are able simply to be with the moment as it seems to be, as we're feeling it in our body, there is no problem. Our Zen practice especially through the extended out breath, will bring us there. And if we work on it long enough, deeply enough, gradually we will be letting go the attachment to trying to self-protect against feelings. And we will begin to comprehend through experience that allowing ourselves to truly feel the energy of those feelings allows them to disperse readily without lasting impact. And then our innate compassion comes to the fore, our innate wisdom, and we can function fully in whatever life we choose, whether it's in the midst of society. There is a set of koans in the Rinzai-roku about the person who's standing at the crossroads and yet free. In the midst of activity, free. One is called upon to demonstrate that experience, which means we have to feel it. I paraphrase this because it's been a long time since I worked on that koan, but there's somebody who can be up in the mountains and in a place of busyness, and a person who can be right there at the crossroads where everything is happening. People are going by, trucks and cars and buses, and things are happening, and be profoundly at peace. That is what is promised to us. That is our place of original face. And when we can reach that place, as the saying goes, even fire can't burn us. There's a story about that one as well. I think it was during the Onin Wars in Japan when there was one Buddhist temple that allowed a contingent from an opposing force to take refuge. And the opposing force arrived, and in order to punish the monks, one of whom had gone into the city, so he was not present at the time, which is why we know the story. But he herded all the rest of the monks and the abbot up into the top of the Sanmon, the triple gate, and set it afire. And one of the monks is clearly in anguish. I'm sure that all of them were, well, maybe not all of them, it depends on how deep their practice was, that they were anxious, at least concerned that there they were, 15, 20 feet up in the air in a wooden building, that the only way out was through the fire, and the fire was not going to let them out. And so this one monk cried out to the master and said, this is terrible. We're going to die. It's going to be awful. And the abbot said, when awakened mind opens, even fire is refreshing. And the example of that is the monks in Vietnam that poured gas on themselves and sat deeply in zazen, not flinching, not screaming, but deeply, deeply meditating as they were dying an extremely painful death. These were all advanced, very advanced monks who had spent decades in meditation and were able to let go of a need to inhabit their bodies. And now this is going to sound like they have souls, but that is not the case. The need to be alive, So people have experienced many serious, painful, terrifying events from a place of deep peace and presence. This is why the samurai were so supportive of Zen practice. That's how Zen began finally to flourish in Japan. It was at the hands of the samurai who were faced with death. That was their livelihood. And it was certainly prevalent. And so they went to the Zen masters to learn how to die in peace, to meet death without flinching, without being caught in the suffering that would certainly come forth as a result. At least the appearance of suffering. And that's the difference. What we can go through in our lives, it's how we receive it that will make the difference in whether it is significant suffering or whether it is simply weathering a storm. It is possible to meet adversity and not be trapped in it, not be torn apart by it, not be destroyed by it, but to come out the other end of it. This is going to be funny to say, but enriched and free. Zen practice offers this. It requires, as I said, walking into where we don't want to walk, feeling what we don't want to feel. And yet, in my experience, observation and understanding, there's no other way but to walk right in. We're held captive otherwise. So we have a choice. We can really, really take to heart the teachings, give ourselves to the practice. It's going to be a challenge. Walk into the challenge and embrace it as fully as possible. And there is, part of the challenge is that it's not like we study a textbook and learn the answers and take the exam and we're free. It's not at all like that. It's about moment to moment being with what appears to be and trying to find the deeper, freer place that is not possible to find through words. Unfortunately, there's no instruction that can be given beyond how to work with a Susokan, how to work with a koan. The rest of it is our own exploration. But through that exploration, we gradually become free if we persist. And of course, there's going to be resistance coming up here and there, and the resistance can be quite convincing. But persist and you will become free. There is no question in my mind about it. So on this 6th day of Sesshin, dive in deeper. We only have one more day left in this concentrated period of Sesshin. And of course, we don't know how many days we have left in our life. But to make the best use of them so that we emerge freer than we walked in. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.